Welcome to today's explainer. So, imagine if the ultimate blueprint for our psychological future wasn't some cutting edge modern scientific breakthrough, but an ancient figure. Today, we're exploring a seriously mind bending premise, the idea that a historical figure from antiquity actually holds the key to the very next stage of human evolution. It sounds crazy, right? But let's dive into this. We're going to be looking at Krishna not just as some relic of the past, but as a profound living psychological map for exactly where human consciousness is headed. So, why look backward to move forward? It's a fascinating paradox. The core philosophy we're exploring here proposes that mankind hasn't actually evolved enough to become contemporary with Krishna yet. Think about that for a second. His mindset is just so advanced, so entirely free of the internal contradictions that usually plague us, that he remains pretty largely misunderstood even today. The idea is that humanity is only just now beginning to develop the psychological capacity to truly grasp his philosophy. That makes him a figure not of our history, but literally of our future. If you look at traditional religious history all across the world, what do you usually see? For centuries, saintliness has been almost exclusively tied to sadness. The most revered figures are often the ones who are relentlessly serious, crying in repentance, or just entirely escaping from life and defeat. They're inherently opposed to the physical world. They view it as a burden, something to endure. But then, there's Krishna. He takes this uniquely joyous approach. He stands out as this solitary figure who dances, laughs, sings, and just wholly embraces every single aspect of existence without an ounce of guilt. It's a complete 180. And that actually brings us to a very famous historical critique. The philosopher Albert Schweitzer famously said, "The religion of India is life negative." Now, that's a pretty heavy accusation, right? It suggests a culture built entirely on denying the joys of the physical world. But there is a brilliant little revelation hidden here. Schweitzer's critique is absolutely true, but only if we forget Krishna. If you remove him from the equation, yeah, historical frameworks do heavily focus on denying life. However, the exact moment you include Krishna, that entire critique completely shatters. He is the ultimate life-positive figure. He completely upends that whole narrative. Picture a vast, sweeping desert of human sadness and psychological denial, just miles and miles of it. Now, right in the middle of that barren, suppressed landscape, Krishna stands as a tiny, dancing oasis. But here's the catch. Because humanity has historically been so totally focused on denying the physical body to somehow elevate the soul, we simply haven't been capable of absorbing the life-affirming waters of this oasis. We just haven't been ready to accept that spirituality can actually be joyful. We haven't been ready to celebrate. So, how exactly does this ancient oasis map onto our modern minds? Well, the evolution of human consciousness essentially falls into three distinct steps. First step, we have the pre-Freud era. This is where almost all traditional teachings insisted that you absolutely must suppress your natural instincts, things like anger, greed, lust, just to achieve salvation. Then came the post-Freud era. This was a massive psychological revolution where we finally realized that suppression actually causes neurosis. It literally fractures and destroys the human mind. And that leads us to the third step, the future, a phase where we no longer fight our natural energies, but actively transform them instead. To really wrap your head around why that first step, suppression, failed so miserably, consider this incredibly thought-provoking analogy. Imagine a gardener who plants millions of seeds using a very strict, rigid method. Millions of these plants wither and die, turning into dry, lifeless stumps. But just one single plant manages to bloom into a magnificent flower. Now, we often look at that one flower, say a Buddha, for instance, and we praise the gardener's method. But if millions of human minds are destroyed and neurotically fractured in the process, that method of suppression is fundamentally flawed. That single flower bloomed in spite of the gardener, definitely not because of him. Which leads us to a simple, yet honestly kind of comical insight. Fighting yourself is a battle you are literally guaranteed to lose. Seriously, think about it. It's exactly like forcing your right hand to arm wrestle your left hand. Who wins that match? Neither. You don't achieve victory, you don't find peace, you just end up entirely exhausted, depleted, and internally defeated. Suppression is ultimately completely self-destructive. It's this deep form of self-violence that keeps humanity stuck in an endless, exhausting loop of internal conflict. So, if fighting ourselves is a guaranteed loss, what on earth is the alternative? Well, the answer is totality. Totality is the complete and absolute acceptance of life in all of its dimensions. It means finally stepping away from picking and choosing. You don't just choose the spiritual realm and reject your physical body. You don't choose inner peace and then run away from the real-world struggles happening all around you.
True evolution, true transcendence, is only ever possible when you accept all extremes, all at the exact same time.
Let's break down how this totality actually works in practice, because the human mind constantly struggles with dualities. We desperately want to divide things up to make them easier to digest, body versus soul, nectar versus poison. But look at how Krishna absorbs these divisions. He embraces body and soul as a single, unified entity. He accepts nectar, but he has absolutely zero fear of poison, because an eternal consciousness has no reason to fear it. And most shockingly to the human mind, he is filled with complete compassion and love, yet maintains the capacity to lead a massive war. He absorbs every single paradox perfectly, without fracturing it all. But absorbing all those paradoxes? That's heavy. And as humans, we frequently do this thing where we sanitize complex truths just to make them more palatable. Even Krishna's most devoted historical worshippers couldn't handle his absolute totality. It was just too contradictory for them. So what do? They broke him into comfortable little pieces. Many chose to exclusively worship the harmless, playful baby Krishna. The youthful Krishna, the guy who loved fiercely, danced wildly, and also ruthlessly directed a war, was just way too complex for a divided human mind to comfortably grasp.
History actually gives us a fascinating example of this struggle if we look at Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi deeply, deeply revered the Bhagavad Gita. He famously called it his mother. Yet Gandhi's strictly nonviolent mind simply couldn't accept Krishna's literal call to war in the Mahabharata. It completely broke his internal rules. So Gandhi had to interpret the massive physical war as merely an internal psychological parable. He essentially had to mold Krishna's immense totality to fit perfectly inside his own personal framework of nonviolence.
So why did this profound ideological clash even happen? Well, it's because Gandhi's mindset was actually remarkably similar to Arjuna's mindset right before the battle began. He was deeply afraid of violence and seeking an escape from the physical realities of the world just to avoid committing a sin. Because Gandhi's entire philosophy was rooted in earthly nonviolence, Krishna's direct command to fight was deeply incompatible. Gandhi couldn't reconcile it because Krishna's logic operates on a plane that goes completely beyond the standard boundaries of physical life and physical death. And right here is the intense core of that ultimate logic. For Krishna, the defining stance is literally this: until you know no one can truly die, you aren't spiritual. Let that sink in. For him, life and death are a cosmic play, a massive, constantly unfolding drama. The fear of killing, or the paralyzing fear of being killed, is rooted entirely in materialism. It's the false belief that this temporary physical body is all that actually exists. To a mind that sees the soul as eternal, the very concept of death is nothing more than an illusion. Fascinatingly enough, our modern scientific understanding is only just now catching up to this ancient realization. This is the whole concept of non-duality, or Advaita. The body and the soul are not enemies locked in some bitter turf war. The body is simply the visible manifestation of the soul, and the soul is just the invisible essence of the body. Nature and the divine aren't separate things. Nature is literally just the visible, tangible form of the divine. The physical and the spiritual exist on the exact same interconnected spectrum. They're completely unified. So how do we actually apply this non-dual logic to our everyday lives? It really comes down to two distinct paths. We've talked a lot about suppression, fighting our natural urges. Suppressing something like lust or anger doesn't magically remove it, it merely shoves it down deep into the subconscious, creating a hyper-obsessed, fractured mind. The true alternative here is transformation. Instead of fighting that powerful natural energy, you accept it totally. You allow it to exist, and through awareness, you elevate that raw energy to its absolute highest spiritual peak. You transform it into profound creativity or deep compassion, rather than trying to destroy a part of yourself. To truly grasp the power of this transformation, consider this brilliant insight from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche: the tree that would grow to heaven must send its roots to hell. It's such a powerful image, isn't it? You cannot selectively choose to only have the beautiful heights. If you are terrified of your darkest, deepest roots, your lowest human instincts, and you try to chop them off, the tree of your consciousness will never, ever reach the highest peaks. The heights and the depths are absolutely proportional. You just have to own all of it. And that brings us to the ultimate realization of this entire philosophy. As humanity continues to evolve, as we finally step past this damaging era of psychological suppression and the constant dividing of our own minds, we are absolutely going to need a totally new framework. As we finally learn to accept life in its raw, unfiltered totality, the essence of Christian's philosophy will become the absolute cornerstone of a new, joy-affirming way of life. We're talking about a future laughing spirituality that doesn't run away from the world but embraces absolutely everything in it. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today. We've seen how fighting ourselves is just a guaranteed losing battle, and how true psychological evolution requires embracing all of our paradoxes, the highest heights and the deepest depths. So ask yourself, if total acceptance is the true key to our future evolution, what parts of yourself are you still trying to suppress? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.